Hi, everybody. This is Allie at Heart and Soul Connected. Thanks for checking in with me today. I'm going to start my new series on the shadow and try to provide you with some information as we go along. And today I just want to introduce you to some of the concepts in a story that sort of can tell us what mankind is uh, underneath everything, because whatever happens to one happens to the whole. So this is just my first taping of the shadow, and as you can see, I'm in my shadow environment, which is my car, because I can't get the internet otherwise. But I'm happy to be here with you all today. This is said to be the wonderful therapist Carl Jung's favorite story. He said that there was a beautiful well that provided water and sustenance for all the people in the village. Everybody could have as much as they wanted, and there was not much effort to get it or any limit to how much you could have. But being human, the people were not content with that freedom of having all of that. They wanted to put some restrictions on it. And since it was so clean and pure and invigorating, they wanted to fence it in. They wanted to charge admission, claim the ownership of it, make laws as to who would go to the well, and put locks on the gates. And as you know, this is the way our world is. We choose to block things off that are good and good for the community by placing restrictions on it. It's not something that is just individual, it's also communal, and it happens all the time. As a matter of fact, one of the great French philosophers said that um, man is free, but everywhere is in chains. And also that the biggest problem we ever had was when there was land ownership, because then now we got to defend our land, we got to put a fence around it, we got to take care of it. Anyway, so they did all of this to the well, and soon the well was the property of only the powerful and the elite people. Ooh, who does that sound like? The water was angry and offended and began to stop flowing and bubble up in another place. The people who owned it were so engrossed in their power systems, they did not notice the water had vanished, and they continued to sell the non-existent water. Let's hear from Enron. Let's hear from Bernie Madoff, okay? Some dissatisfied people searched with courage and found the new artesian well, and soon that well was under the control of property owners as well. The spring took itself to another place, and this has been going on and on and on in recorded history. Water has always been the symbol of spirituality, the subconscious, and the underneath. So Jung believed that this was absolutely one of the best stories to tell to explain some of those things. It is flowing in our time in history as always, and it's also ceased to flow. But thank God the water is still there, or at least it is as we speak today. So, to honor and accept one's shadow is a very profound spiritual discipline. It's not that the shadow is always a negative thing. We think of the shadow because if you're outside and your body is here and you cast a shadow on the ground, the shadow is dark. It isn't part of you. And many times we cast the dark out of us, at least up here, so we can deal with our day to day. That isn't helped by our cultural expectations and the expectations of our families and so on. So the two parts, the ego and the shadow, are explained this way. Ego is what we know about ourselves and who we are, or who we think we are. The shadow is the part we fail to see or fail to know. There are a lot of people, for instance, who fail to see that they are destroying themselves through overeating or drinking or taking drugs, because they think that won't happen to them, and they're going to be okay. They're failing to see how the shadow has taken over their life. There are also people on the other side of the spectrum who are fabulous people but can't accept a compliment, or they're called a hero for saving somebody or doing something good, but they can't accept that part. That's their shadow. It's we think, oh, that's only can be the bad things, but for this they don't accept that, and so they push it away, and they don't acknowledge the fact that they are wonderful people, that other people see them as wonderful human beings, and they do really well for themselves. So the division that we have is due to our cultural judgment as well, as I explained. Half of it is unacceptable, or half of it is acceptable, and we must put it away if it's unacceptable, and we can embrace it if it isn't. It has to do with choices. It has to do with how we are seen. But those just don't go away, the ones that we bury. They're always there, and they're ready to bubble up anytime we have a crisis happen to us in our lives, or anytime we're faced with our shadow. So they collect themselves in this little dark corners of our psyche, and they can take on a life of their own. How can they do that? Well, you could be saying everything is fine, everything is fine, everything is fine, and then realize at some point everything is not fine, and maybe you have uncontrollable rage over something, and you yell and scream and throw and kick and punch and who knows what. I'm not excusing people for doing those things, but if you push it down enough, it's got to come out somewhere. It just doesn't go away. Other people push it down far enough so that the anger becomes part and parcel of who they are, and they end up with some kind of illness from pushing down and not releasing that energy through which they don't want to be seen. Now, I know that there are cells and science and all kinds of other things that have to do with why we get sick, but sometimes we also have what they call um, um, accidents that didn't have to happen because we didn't look and we didn't know, and so we can become what we despise very, very easily. Um, we suppress things. We might have an indiscretion. We might turn to drugs or alcohol. We might turn to any kind of a feeling of depression, a feeling of hopelessness. And in some cases, I would say that if you push it down far enough, because you can see that with some of our wonderful comics that we've had in our lives, like Chris Farley, like Robin Williams, they push it down and push it down, and they're majorly, majorly depressed, but they don't want anyone to know that because they've suppressed their shadow side. They're supposed to be funny. They're supposed to be enjoyable, and we're supposed to laugh and not feel bad for them. So, yes, you could have an accident to have its own purpose in your life to deal with the side that you're hiding. And many times, if you do that, then you become wounded in some way. And through that wounding, you become able to then express that wounding and become a wounded healer to help other people who may need your help. So it's just fascinating how this all works. But it works in the microcosm, which is us, and it works in the collective, or the macrocosm, which is the society. Our society has suppressed a lot of things. We've suppressed racism, at least the white nationals or the people that have, suppressed it. And then they were allowed to let it go, and that's exactly what they did. So was it ever gone, or was it only suppressed? That's something that you'd have to decide. But we have to look at our dark side, our shadow side, or else we remain very primitive people. We're not enlightened. We're not moving along the spiritual ladder, so to speak. By the way, I am not a therapist, and I am not here to give you any kind of therapeutic help. I am a humanist. I am a humanities teacher, and I work with concepts of mythological and archetypal healing, and also cultural. So I just want you to realize, and I want a disclaimer that says I'm not here judging anybody or. The other thing is, a lot of people, this particular book that I use is wonderful. It's Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert Johnson, and it's not really big, and I'm working through it, but I'm taking what I believe and most of everything that I believe because he's an expert in the field and study Jungian psychology. So culture has determined for us what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. It has changed over time. It used to be acceptable that men went to work and women stayed home and cleaned the house and made the dinner and did all that stuff. Eventually, we moved ourselves out of that a little bit. Women were back to work, although women are still relegated to do most of the tasks. In a marriage, it just works out that way, especially with children. But that is something that can be, discussed and not pushed to the shadow side with the other spouse and, make it work. Our culture has imposed structures differently around the world, however. For instance, in the United States, we drive on the right side of the road. And in the UK and other, in Japan, so forth, they drive on the left side of the road. Now that may seem like, well, what's that? That's no big deal, but it is a cultural decision. And I want you to know that there are lots and lots of cultural decisions that are made that you have to live by in order to live in that culture. How about wearing shoes in holy places? If we were going to church, let's say at a Christian church on a Sunday here, we would not take our shoes off at the door. Everybody would find that to be extremely odd. Whereas in a Hindu temple and some of the Asian religions, it's a sign of disrespect to wear shoes into a holy place. You leave your shoes and you put on booties, or you even go barefoot, but you do not bring shoes in. How about burping after eating a great big meal? Well, if you did that at grandma's house in the United States, you'd be called rude. But if you did that in Germany after having a big meal, the cook would know you enjoyed the food. So all of these things are cultural, and there's many, many more things. These are just obvious things. Culture, the shadow of the culture is never always accepted by the other culture either. For instance, some shadow, you could say in one culture, eating a cow in India would be abysmal. You don't do those kinds of things. But in the United States, cows are eaten, the animal flesh is eaten, and nobody thinks that it might be their grandmother reincarnated. So it becomes a shadow issue, however. If you saw someone in India, let's say, eating a cow, then that would be a great sacrilege. Whereas here, we may not choose to eat a cow, but we have the opportunity to if we choose to have a hamburger. Um, I told you about the noble characteristics like heroes and people that are kind and people that are appreciated or complimented on. Many people, if you compliment them, you have a lovely smile, or you have, I love your dress, or your jewelry is lovely. Many of us say, oh, it's nothing. I got it from Walmart, or, we dismiss it, whereas it's meant to be a compliment. And we are, part of our shadow is saying to ourselves, we're not worthy, but we are worthy. And, we can accept a compliment for, if we pull up that shadow and say, wait a minute, that was a very nice thing for that person to say. They didn't have to say anything to you, right? So think about how we live between shadow and ego. It's like a teeter-totter. And so you've got to find this perfect balance somehow of good or ego and shadow, and find a way to get it balanced so that it isn't like this or this. Because if it is, you're out of balance and you're only creating more balance by doing such a thing. If us also live in duality, we make everything is good or bad, up or down, in or out. Duality isn't something you have to choose. You don't have to either like it or hate it. You don't have to, choose one side over the other side. You can be in the middle, and that's okay. We must make shadow, however, or there is no culture, the author says. We have to restore the wholeness of our personality, or we end up being divided and we face a lot of pain. I think this is something reason that I wanted to bring this up is that this is something that we're dealing with right now as a collective. We're dealing with shadow, and we're dealing with shadow on both sides. There are things that we don't like about ourselves, or what we choose, but still are others dealing. Have to find a balance, because there is no complete right and there is no complete wrong. Society has to come to terms with how they want to do this. And we, as individuals, must make a collective self available to us. The first half of our lives, we spend having a family, gaining skills, going to college, disciplining ourselves, start a fitness regime, get married, whatever it is. Whatever it is. We're spending a lot of time. A lot of that is unconscious wholeness. We want to find parts that we're interested in, and we want to bring those into a collective. The second half of life is meant to restore wholeness and make life holy. And that could be spelled Holy or Wholly. We are whole and we're also holy. We must find the completion in order to attain the wholeness that we so desperately want and balance both sides, which is, I'm going to tell you right now, it's not easy. Anytime you're diving deep and you're trying to figure out what it is about yourself that is not working, you're working with shadow. And many alcoholics go to the opposite end of the spectrum and they become temperate. They don't stay alcoholics. And, we can be this thing and something can happen to us and we go to the total opposite end of the spectrum. You'll notice even in our culture that conservatives are very, in politics, are very quick to do not condemn their own in any way. So right now we have, for instance, Liz Cheney's doing it. That's the first. She brings up the shadow, but nobody else except maybe Adam has agreed with that. Whereas the other side, the more liberal, they will call out the liberals for what their behavior is. You're seeing that right now with the Mario Cuomo incident. They're asking Mario to step down. Not Mario, so sorry. Andrew. I'm saying his father's name, sorry. The other thing, the other example is the conservatives were very big on police and the blue line and everything about that. And then they didn't want anything to do with the police and the getting hurt in the insurrection, which I find to completely abysmal. We cannot make light without dark. We cannot be dark without some light. So you need to know that. What we can choose to view the dark side intelligently. And when I say it's our dark side or the dark side of our society. Nature lives in polarity. They have creation and destruction through nature throughout the year. They're the way that the nature works with each other, the survival of the fittest and so on. And nature never worries about anything. They know that they will have, animals, birds know that they will be provided. To own your shadow is to reach a holy place, your inner center, to reveal what your life's purpose is, and to assist you in balanced. To be honest, I have a very dark side, I guess, and that is that all my whole life, I lose a lot of weight and then I sabotage myself and I gain it back. I've had bariatric surgeries done and I still do it. And so I have to own that shadow. I have to take it and say to myself, if you don't own this shadow, you will end up, sick, not well, fat, whatever it is. So, I'm the first to admit that I'm not smart to do that. That's not what you do when you have a problem like that and you have diabetes. So, in order for me to grow, in order for me to walk the talk, I need to work on my own shadow side, and I need to do that by integrating both sides into the middle and make that work and not own my shadow. I hope this all makes sense to you. If you have any questions, please put them down for me so I can look at them and discuss more when I do my second part to this. And if you're interested in reading the book I'm reading, it's Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert Johnson. It's not real long. I haven't gotten very far in it. I'm just in the very first part of it, and Puppy chewed on here so you can see that it's been ragged by Puppy Chew. But anyway, that's all I have for you today. So God bless you. Remember that the shadow is nothing to be afraid of. The shadow is meant to balance you. And so live in peace, knowing that